It's been almost a year since former Patriots player Aaron Hernandez killed himself in prison after he was convicted of murder. But despite the passage of time, Hernandez's troubled life remains catnip for the press, especially when it comes to his sexuality. Adam Riley has more.
Even if you're not a football fan, Oxygen's new Aaron Hernandez documentary is easy to watch, with slick production and compelling interviews, including Hernandez's former fiancée, Shayana Jenkins.
I cried for a very long time.
But what really stands out in Aaron Hernandez Uncovered is the focus on Hernandez's sexual orientation, with revelations from a former girlfriend.
Back in college, I had questioned his sexuality.
And the lawyers who represented him.
Aaron and I talked about his sexuality. This man clearly was gay. Acknowledged it.
For the record, this isn't a new topic. After his suicide, Hernandez's sexuality was discussed in detail.
Was he secretly gay?
The Aaron that I know, no.
Still, the ensuing coverage shows the media remains fascinated by the subject.
One of the big things that's brought up now is that his sexuality.
I don't think that's relevant to killing somebody.
Oxygen implies that Boston writer Michelle McPhee and WEEI's Kirk Minahan and Jerry Callahan pushed Hernandez to kill himself by broaching his sexuality on air.
If that pushed him over the edge, so be it. No, I have no regret.
But the film has its own critics. Outsports says it's troublesome that Hernandez's lawyer revealed private personal information, and WEEI's Alex Reamer calls the film a shallow docuseries that used Hernandez's sexuality to grab eyeballs, including the media's.
So Adam and I kind of disagreed on this. He thinks that there's this over-salacious sort of fixation on this for no reason. I said, to me, there is a reason if they directly connect the motive for the murder of Odin Lloyd to his sexuality, that Odin Lloyd knew that they had this secret life, that he had had a relationship with a man, that something else was ongoing, and that if that's the reason, then it's relevant, even now, even after it's death, because while he was convicted, there was never a motive established. It was all circumstantial.
Well, there's another reason, too, and it's in the documentary. The defense claims that the prosecutors in Aaron Hernandez's second murder trial, which he was found not guilty, that they were planning to introduce his sexuality as to establish motive. They were prevented from doing so. And then they claim that the prosecutors then went to his fiancée and told her that information in an attempt to flip her. So there is in the documentary, it's a pretty solid plot point. What's different about the way that it's being covered is that's not the context in which it's being covered in the media afterwards. That's being ignored, and I do think there is an entirely salacious attempt at grabbing eyeballs.
In the spilling out.
Right, but that's not the way that it's presented necessarily. And I think we need to look at whether or not that was in fact something that the prosecution was attempting to do. Because if it's true, then that is very troublesome.
Well, wasn't there also someone reporting about the fact, and maybe it came out in the documentary, I don't recall, but they were talking about the fact that he was molested at the time when he was younger, and somehow that was what kind of led him to be the person that he was and led him to be gay, which I found
that was in the documentary.
Yeah, that was somewhat disturbing, I thought, making that connection at all. I agree. I mean, if you cannot connect the dots to saying this is relevant to us understanding more about why this all happened, or just shedding light on something more about, what sort of drove him. I don't think you need to touch this. He's dead, he's gone, and any other reason for using this now is just to get attention.
Well, I mean, that would suggest that there is something salacious or wrong about being gay, and clearly there isn't. But I do find it interesting that we have this focus on whether he or not he is gay, really just stemming from some old-fashioned stereotypes that he's this big macho former football player, gangster, killed people. How could he be gay? So I think that that's going on too. What doesn't fit in this is that he supposedly also had one of the worst cases of CTE that they've ever been able to measure, and that was thought to be a reason that he might have become a killer. And that certainly doesn't fit with his sexual orientation being a motive for what happened. So, you know, I think that I agree with you, Emily. It's in there somewhere as worth discussing,
yes.
but it hasn't been discussed in a particularly mature fashion.
Well, no major media outlet has touched it. And,
no.
I argued a while back when Michelle McPhee first reported this that she said it's common knowledge. I didn't know about it. I mean, she said it was common knowledge in certain circles, but
yep.
no one has ever looked at it.
Well, I found out about it. This is actually the second big piece about Aaron Hernandez.
Oh, yeah,
So 48 Hours did a piece in conjunction with James Patterson's book, and James Patterson talks about this a lot. He traces all of these things that were brought up in this new Oxygen piece. And I agree with you that it has relevance for all the reasons that have been stated here. But the way that he lays out all of the pieces, it comes down to something of what you've said, Dan, about people struggling around that stereotype of his and the macho-ness, which also played out in many other ways in his kind of erratic behavior throughout all of the rest of the stuff that had to do with the killings, and the violence. So I think it's more complicated than that, and we know why people go to that point if they find something interesting, and also it's not convincing at all, and that the girlfriend would or would not know, because often that stuff is really kept on the down low, as we say.
Yeah,
so,
it's true.